Okay, Susan and Cynthia, thank you so much for joining us. It's an honor to have you here.
We are delighted to be here.
Delighted.
Well, we are delighted to have you.
Yeah.
I think what struck me, I don't know if I'd say most about this book, but what struck me throughout the book was that it's sort of infused with your personal journeys. You can tell that you're in a different place, and I don't want to put a number of years on it necessarily, but like than you were a decade ago or more. And that really resonates with me too, because I feel like that's been sort of like actually a pretty similar time frame. And so I wonder, we have so much to talk about, but I wonder if you wouldn't mind each taking a few minutes to tell us a little bit about your growing up story in the church and sort of like how you landed where you are now. Just, some of the interesting contours there, if it's okay.
Yeah.
And maybe Cynthia, would you mind starting?
Yeah, I would love to. I feel like I am a very typical Latter-day Saint in that the church worked so perfectly for me. My whole life, I grew up in Southern California. Like, I grew up playing basketball at the church and softball tournaments and driving to dances in Newport Beach. Everybody give me $1 for gas, that kind of a thing. Like, I loved everything about the church. Youth conferences, you name it. It made me who I am. I give all the credit in so many ways to who I am because of the church. And then life just happens as it does. And the year I turned 40, like huge family issues, everything fell apart. And I kind of found myself in, I don't know if I really described it as a faith crisis, but kind of a crisis of a little bit of everything else in a way, like an organizational crisis, a trust crisis, like things like that. And so it took a long time to kind of put the pieces back together. And I feel like I had to kind of put them together on my own and maybe with help from like online friends like Susan. So really that's kind of my story is, classic Latter-day Saint for 40 years. And then I've kind of been about a dozen years now into this journey of stage 2 faith,
Yeah.
If I look at my own story, those early years for me, it felt like something was going really wrong, when my faith started to change. Did you have that same feeling? And to the extent you did, has that changed now?
I didn't feel like something was going wrong, surprisingly. I felt like this is where God was leading me. Like I never had that fear so much, but I felt tremendous pain. So in a way, it kind of all gets jumbled together anyway. Like the pain was so intense. I describe it maybe even in the book as like being in a dark pit and trying to like scratch my way out, but I just keep clawing at dirt and mud. And it just wasn't getting better for a long time. So in a way, it was a dark night of the soul.
Yeah.
Just because I was in so much pain that I didn't know what to do.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Susan, do you want to share?
You bet. One of the things that I've loved about collaborating with Cynthia is that while we have an awful lot in common in our church experience, we also come from fundamentally different places, because she is the kind of member for whom the church worked so well. And I am the kind of member who wore the church like an itchy sweater from, the first second that I can remember in junior Sunday school at that time. So I grew up right in the heart of Salt Lake City, in a huge ward with general authorities and even a prophet in my ward. I really grew up right in the center of activity for the church. But for some reason, I always kind of struggled with it. But I struggled with it quietly. And so I don't describe myself as ever having had a faith crisis, but what I did have was a silence crisis. I came to this place where at age 50, I had a serious bump with mortality. And I realized at that point that I didn't know if there was an afterlife. I will never forget the second. I'm driving with my husband along, and all of a sudden, sipping on a Diet Coke, and said, hey, I don't know if there's an afterlife. And he almost drove off the road, honestly, to his credit. He didn't, but he said, I think that's pretty foundational. I think you should do something about that. And I guess as it occurred to me that I didn't know, I didn't realize just how foundational that was. It touched everything. It touched everything that I had testified about my whole life, that I had thought that I believed, that I had, acted as if I knew was true. But I realized in that moment that the root of my struggle was that I really never did know those things. for myself. And so I started to try to untangle some of that in silence. But eventually I realized I'm going to die if I don't have anyone I can talk to about this. And so I started to write and to speak about it. And I took a Calling Teaching Relief Society. Just about 10 minutes after I realized I didn't know what I believed or if I cared about any of it, I took that calling because I would say for the first time in my life, I met something that I felt like really was inspiration in the form of that calling coming to me. I had big questions I needed to answer. I wanted to be able to work them out within the context of my faith community, right? People I loved in my ward. I thought, I got to find out if this can be a safe place to be who I am, to have the questions that I have, and to come to some kind of peace with those, with my people. And so I took that calling and wrestled all of it right on the floor of that Relief Society room with those women. And it was remarkable. It was life-saving and it was faith-saving for me.
I'm so interested in asking you about that because I resonate with this idea of a silence crisis. And I think that's why I've always loved the title of your podcast and the title of your book, At Last She Said It. Because for me, it was like, it captured this feeling of like holding something in. Finally, you hear somebody say what you're thinking. Right. And it occurred to me today, like there are other ways that you can hear that podcast title. So I'm curious how you were thinking about it. But I think my real question for you is this. I know one thing I know about myself is that it's uncomfortable for me to talk about a hard thing that hasn't already been resolved, especially if there's not a tidy solution on the horizon to feel very optimistic about. And I still like, it makes me feel really uncomfortable. Like I get absurdly optimistic when I'm talking about pain because it just feels like otherwise you just have to deal with with like how uncomfortable the pain is, you know? And so this is something where I feel like I have been mentored by you two, just listening to the podcast and then reading the book, that there's something healing about just saying the honest, true thing, even when it's complicated and there isn't something tidy around the corner to fix it all. But I would love to hear for you why that has been healing. Like, why does it feel like it's important to talk about these things that are sometimes hard when it feels like maybe there's nothing even to do about it?
Oh gosh, so many reasons. First of all, to speak to one thing that you just said, we do sometimes hear from people who say, why don't you have people share faith promoting stories? You know, because when people come on, there's not always a tidy resolution, right? Like you're saying. And, you know, we really have come to the realization that faith promoting is a pretty broad category that is actually a lot bigger than we have traditionally allowed it to be, perhaps. And so my faith has been saved by being able to say some of the things that really were difficult, right? And that's because I found place. I found I was met by other people who said, oh, yeah, me too. Yeah. So I wasn't alone for the first time in my life. And I was also able to provide space for other people who had been, you know, languishing in silence also and waiting to be invited into the room. And then the other thing that I realized was all of those years that I was holding back from talking about the things I needed to, I was really keeping the largest part of my heart to myself. I wasn't showing up in whole at church, you know, and if I don't show up in whole, I can't give my whole self to those people and to my faith. And so really, I wasn't doing anybody any favors, you know, not myself, but also not the other people around me by holding those things inside. Yeah. So it was all about creating space for myself and others.
Yeah. Oh, that resonates.
And if that's not
so much
faith
with me.
Promoting, you know, I don't know what is. We're here to grow together. We're here to learn together. And we're here to lead each other, right? Yeah. So anyway, it all begins with talking. Yeah. It has to.
Well, when you talk about the spectrum of things that could be faith promoting, the definition of faith becomes really important. And you talk about this in your book, but like, I think when we say faith promoting, we often mean belief promoting,
right?
Which is, there's a distinction there.
Yep.
Right. I mean, would you, either one of you mind sharing a little bit about like how you think about faith versus belief?
I think we have a whole chapter about faith in here. And we really kind of take on faith versus knowing because we definitely belong in a church of knowing, right? I mean, I was taught since I was a little girl, I know the church is true. I know so-and-so is the prophet. I know, all these amazing things. And yet I realized I was testifying about things I didn't know and really could never know, because religion is all about faith. Mm-hmm. And to me, when you know something, it's like, okay, the thinking has been done. Whereas with faith, there's always a struggle. You're always wrestling with it. You're always reassessing what your faith is in. And so to me, faith is what I'm more interested in. And it wasn't until maybe that dark night of the soul that really I was like, oh, what do I know? And then I had to start to change my vocabulary and be like, okay, if I know nothing, then where is my trust? Where is my hope? Where is my faith? And that became something that was much more able to power my discipleship rather than the I knows that I had been trained to say my whole life. So for me, it really was everything switching to a life of faith rather than a life of knowing.
I'm curious, Susan, when you mentioned that you had that brush with mortality.
Yes.
And you realized that you didn't know if there was an afterlife. Was your initial reaction similar to what it sounds like your husband maybe was implying, that you needed to shore up your knowing, that you needed to go and figure out how to know? Or did you recognize that you needed to become more comfortable with your not knowing?
That's a really good question. At first I felt a little panicky and of course, like, I probably needed to know, but I had the simultaneous realization that I had never known. Mm-hmm. And so what I really realized is I need to engage with these questions. I didn't realize I was at liberty to ask those questions. I didn't think that was really my purview as a Latter-day Saint, right? I felt like the answers had been provided for me, and my job was to accept those answers and live my life accordingly, which I was doing a great job of doing those things, but never having engaged the questions, was it my truth? Were those my answers? They weren't. And so therefore, when I needed them, when I really bumped up against something where I needed the things that my religious life should have provided me, it wasn't there. Mm-hmm. There was nothing there. So I really realized it was time to engage the questions. And I really realized how little spiritual growth there really had been in my life. And I realized that the place of growth does not exist in certainty. Certainty is an end, right? It's the moral of the story. But the place of growth exists in faith. Yeah. And that is an entirely different thing. That's a process. That's an action word, right? I mean, faith, I think, actually is a verb. In the Hebrew, we faith, like it's a thing we do, right? And so it's an entirely different thing. I had been thinking about faith as knowledge and stepping up to the microphone and saying, I know the church is true. Well, that's not the same thing at all. And so I really didn't have the tools of faith, but I also didn't have the benefit of faith when I needed it. I had to relearn what that could mean for me.
Yeah. Could I ask one more follow-up? And I'm so sorry, I'm talking way too much. I apologize. But when you said, was that my truth? I'm curious what you might say to someone who bristles when they hear that and they think, well, truth is truth.
Truth is truth.
There's no my truth in your truth. How do you, I'm sure you've thought a lot about this. How would you respond to that?
I think that faith is not really about what we know. Faith is not really about knowing things. It's about how to know things. And those are two different approaches. And so it became very important to me how I know those things. And so when I say, was that my truth? That's really about how did it come to me? Is it an idea that someone else handed to me? Or is it something that I have proven and experimented upon in my own life and come to know, in my bones and in my experience?
Yeah.
That's very helpful.
There's this line that I loved that from Pete Enns that you quote about how doubt enters in when certainty has run its course. And that has felt very true to me, that like certainty worked for a while. And I think it did help me build this very solid foundation, and it stretched me for a long time. And then it felt like it evaporated and like it slipped through my fingers and I wanted it back so much. And certainty feels so comfortable and safe, and everything feels it feels easy to understand. And I loved what you write about fear and the role that has played in your religious life. I think I felt so afraid because all of a sudden these things I wanted to believe so much felt totally out of my control. Like, so like, what do you do with that when all you can actually sense is uncertainty and fear?
You want to speak to that? Or you want
She's
me to
looking at you,
speak to
Susan.
Oh my goodness. Fear is so central to my faith life and to my journey. I mean, I have to preface that by saying that I have struggled with some mental health challenges throughout my life. I'm very open about that. That's not a secret to anyone who talks to me for more than about 3 minutes. But anxiety is really at the heart of that. And so fear has been a lot of my discomfort at being a Latter-day Saint for a lot of my childhood. I felt like I shouldn't have so much anxiety. I shouldn't struggle so much with fear if I was doing it right. Wow. And the fact that I lived with so much fear was an indictment somehow of my faith, right? And so really grappling with fear has been a big part of understanding my own faith life and how it wasn't operating in my life and how I wanted it to operate in my life, right? And control is, it's just tangled right into that, because I feel like as Latter-day Saints, we very often use language that would lead one to believe that they have a lot more control over events in this life than I have found to be true in my own life, right? That if we make the right choices, choose the right things, live the right way, then certain things are going to manifest in our lives, right? Certain things are going to work out for us. It's pretty hard not to fall into the trap of that kind of thinking. And to be fair, that is not just Latter-day Saints. I think that's across religion, right? This is something that religions leverage, and I understand why, because it works. People are afraid. I mean, that's just part of the human experience. It's a darn scary thing to be alive on this planet. And so, fear is really central to me. And learning how to cede control became maybe job one of this whole journey.
Really?
Yeah. I've worked on that probably more consistently and with less success than anything else in all of it. Because I really felt like if I couldn't give it away, if I couldn't give my need to control things and to assuage my fears by gripping everything tighter, if I couldn't give that away, then I really couldn't be in relationship with God. That was what seeking that relationship and really finding it in any kind of meaningful way was going to require of me.
We've had so many conversations about anxiety and fear in our own family, and it's interesting to me that in every other context of our lives, you face fear, you walk into the fear, you learn to practice being uncomfortable, and then the discomfort settles,
right?
As opposed to feeding it and avoiding it and letting it grow. But I had this special caveat, which was that in spirituality it's different, and that the fear is the guide. It felt like there was always this conversation happening between God and Satan, and so I gave it a lot of credibility. I think it has helped to think about it like all of the rest of these contexts. So fear actually has felt more like an invitation to be curious than like a scary warning, even in this space of belief and faith. But we have different language around our faith life that makes fear seem more powerful.
Oh my gosh. We wrote a lot about it in the book because I noticed as I started like putting my faith back together, how much fear had played into my own spirituality, more from the angle though of obedience. And obedience came so easy to me. Like I said, the church worked so perfectly for me until it didn't. And then I started looking at maybe a lot of the choices I had been making were because I was afraid of not being the good girl. Like that was huge for me. Like I really excelled at being the good girl. And so it's like, I was afraid of, you know, if I deconstruct or take things apart too much, well, what am I if I'm not good? You know, or just, I mean, there were just so many things around obedience that I could point to fear. And I remember, I don't know, about 5 years into my journey when Elder Uchtdorf gave a talk in like 2017, I think it's called Perfect Love Casteth Out Fear. Could be wrong. Edit that out. But I felt like that was like this monumental talk. I really thought there would be this whole shift in the church. I thought we would look at this differently after that. And I'm like fist bumping in the air. And it's like one of my most favorite conference talks ever. Maybe it was just for me. Maybe it wasn't, for the whole church. But I just really felt like, okay, he talks so much in that talk about like fear can get you to do things, but it rarely has the power to transform. Wow. And so my faith life had moved from knowing, and this rock solidness to more of transformation and faith and trust. And so all of a sudden I kind of developed this fear-dar, like a radar, right? And I could kind of spot it in everything in my faith life. And I decided no more. I'm not doing that anymore. I'm not afraid. I'm just going to step into faith. You were saying kind of the antidote to that is to just start running or just take an action. Mm-hmm. And that will usually kind of subside what we thought this is the worst thing that could possibly happen. And it's like, actually, it wasn't. Like I did okay. Yeah. So no more fear. Yeah.
I really resonate with that. My anxiety and fears have long been rooted in the question of obedience as well. Yeah. To the point it was clinical. Like for me, I struggled with OCD on my mission. I didn't know that it was OCD at the time, obviously. And I think part of what made it feel, what made me so anxious and afraid was that the stakes seemed so high. Right. For obedience, and especially when you're on a mission, at least, when I was a missionary, it was sort of explicit that the stakes were very high. Right. Like if you aren't obedient, then you lose the Spirit. If you lose the Spirit, you're not going to find the person who needs you to find them, or you're not going to be able to teach with the Spirit, and people won't engage in ordinances and covenants that they need to in order to get to the celestial kingdom and be with their families forever. And so like what higher stakes could there possibly be?
That's a lot.
Yeah, it's a lot. And I think in various ways that continued to manifest even after my mission. I am now on this kick. I'm like talking about this all the time. You know exactly where I'm going with this. It seems to me now the stakes have lowered dramatically.
Nice.
I no longer think that these really specific beliefs and actions that I thought about as very, very important for a long time, and they are important. That's not what I'm trying to say necessarily, but like that the stakes are astronomically high. Yeah. I have more trust now that God is big enough to handle whatever. Right. And that I can sort of accept a low stake, like I'm going to be caught sort of regardless of what I do or how far I fall, and maybe I'm wrong about that. And I'm sure there are people listening that are cringing as I say this, but I think in order for me to like survive as a religious person, the stakes have had to get lower for me. I'm curious if that resonates with your
No,
journey.
that totally resonates with me because are you familiar with Mel Robbins' Let Them?
Yes.
Yeah. That ended up becoming like a mantra of mine. Like, even though in my head, I would just be like, okay, I'm not in charge of what people think about me. But to have that phrase, I would just be like, let them think I'm not a good girl anymore. Let them think I'm on a slippery slope. It was this point of resignation, kind of in Buddhism, like non-attachment, like just, detaching from what outcomes could be. And so letting people think, and you can tell where I'm going, like I was the obedient good girl. And so for me, that was really, really huge to just be kind of what you're saying. I'm going to be okay anyway. Like I'm going to be okay if I'm not seen as the good girl, I lose my reputation. But like you were saying, the stakes were so high. And that's something we hear so often from women. They write us and they're like, what if I'm wrong? And we actually have a whole chapter in the book, There Are Worse Things Than Being Wrong, where we kind of break down that whole idea. And that was kind of my own therapyizing myself because I was so caught up in like the stakes are so high. I can't be wrong about these things. And to kind of stand back and say, what if I am wrong?
Yeah.
What if I am? There are worse things.
Yeah.
Totally. And especially when you don't control the outcome. This is, I think, a lot of Latter-day Saint fear is rooted in the idea that we're all aiming to be together with our families forever, right? And we can control ourselves, but our happiness sort of depends on other people's choices because we don't want any empty seats at the table.
That's right.
And so you drive yourself crazy because, again, the stakes are astronomically high and you don't control the outcome. Right. And so it's this fear that has no solution because at the end of the day, you're not letting them, right? You're trying to force something that you can't force. And we have a whole doctrine that actually helps with this, which is agency. But you worry about that you continue to worry about the effects of other people's agency. And so you try to rip it away from them. It creates this very tricky conundrum.
Yeah. And that's why we say about agency, we don't believe our own stuff.
Yes.
Because it goes into that category for us. We don't believe our own stuff is a whole category of episodes on our podcast where there are ideas that we give really great lip service to in our church, but when it comes down to actually putting them to work, making them really useful in our lives,
we struggle.
We struggle, and agency is one of them. And all you need to do is get children in their 30s and 40s. You will know what I'm talking about. It gets very complicated. And allowing other people to have their agency and being able to cede that control, like I was saying, that's a hard stuff for a Latter-day Saint. Like we're not trained in that. No matter how much we talk about agency on Sunday, where the rubber meets the road, it's pretty hard sometimes.
Would either of you mind speaking directly to that question of celestial families, letting people have their agency? How do you, and hoping, having this vision of heaven in which you're together with your family, and yet there's a covenant path that's required?
Like I said, we have a chapter where we're talking about there are worse things than being wrong. And when that came to me, it was, I had a daughter who came out as gay when she was 18 years old. And so all of a sudden, our family looked very differently than what the family proclamation says our families should look like. And so I kept thinking, do I accept my daughter as she is? This is what's best for her mental health, physical health, spiritual health. Or do I double down, on what I thought I knew a family should look like? And so that's when I feel like I had the impression, Cynthia, there are worse things than being wrong. And honestly, a phrase of Gordon B. Hinckley that powered me was, he said, if we are to err, let us err on the side of mercy. And so really it comes down to mercy for me. When I'm making these decisions that maybe have these astronomical choices, I fall back onto mercy. And it's like, okay, what would be the merciful thing to do in this situation? And so at least for me and my family, how I've kind of walked through, yes, these heavy things of like covenant path, it seems like you have to do this, 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 and this. And I'm like, okay, I don't have answers about all that anymore. But what I do know is that mercy and love is always the answer. And so I lean on that now.
I love that.
I remember, I think this has probably been a couple of years now, but I was talking with MacArthur Krishna about something I was agonizing about. I don't remember what it was, but I remember her just being like, what if you just want good things? I think I had this paradigm that what I wanted was always going to be at odds with the right thing. And the stakes did feel very high, but maybe I do want good things naturally. Maybe the thing that I feel pulled toward, maybe that's good. Maybe that is how the Spirit works in me. And I want it because it is good. And I'm not in battle against what's good. Like this is, I think, my internal compass, and I think all of our internal compasses are generally pointing us toward the thing that is good growth for us. And it reminds me so much of what you write about, Susan, about the cross. And I just love this idea so much. You say something like, the cross is this reminder to you that you can follow no matter where you go, that it's like God's arms are reaching in every direction. And that's where I feel like I am right now, that just this trust that God can still reach me. Even if I was wrong, like that could be made good. Like it could be made into something that will turn into good in my life. It's the path that God's going to use to tutor me. And so I love that symbol. I love the way you think of that symbol, that because I trust that however our winding, narrow path looks, God will be able to reach us there and make it good.
I love having a physical symbol, and I'm surprised by it. I'm surprised when the cross came into my life actually as a meaningful symbol, because I did not expect that. I hadn't ever felt any connection to it. In fact, I would say I felt the opposite, I guess, growing up as a Latter-day Saint in the time period that I did.
Yeah,
the cross nervousness was very out of favor.
Yeah. Yes.
Let's just say it that way.
Yeah.
But hopefully our lives are teaching us, and some of the lessons that mine was teaching me at the time that I sort of stumbled back onto the cross as a meaningful symbol, that really resonated. That was the right thing for a whole bunch of reasons. But I want to say one thing back to the question that you asked him. Having my children step away from the church and having them make different life choices than the ones that I was planning on. I thought I made it clear exactly what they were supposed to do. I had one job. I thought I did it. You know, that required pretty substantial renovation in my own faith life and in my relationship with God. It sort of changed my understanding of everything. And for that reason alone, I can't not be grateful for the growth that that has brought to me. Do I understand how that all fits into our doctrine and what that all looks like in the end? I do not. But one thing that became clear to me very early on was that any God worth believing in would love me at least as much as I love my children. And it never really became clear to me how much I loved my children until they made that choice that I had to grapple with, and all of the implications of it. And there are deep implications for Latter-day Saints, you know, in that kind of diverging path within your family. And so that really introduced me to a deeper understanding of the nature of God. And that has only gotten better as I've moved on to having grandchildren now. It's even grown a little more, because now I look at my grandchildren with a different kind of love than I looked at my children with, right? With my children, I still had some ego involved in that love. As a parent, if I could have gotten the ego out of my parenting, I would have been a much better parent, but I've never yet been able to figure out how to do that with my grandchildren. Ego is gone.
Wow.
And I can love them in a way that feels wholly different to me from anything else I've ever experienced in my life. And that helps me know that it is deeply okay, all of it, that I am, that my children are, that all of this is being orchestrated by someone so much bigger than we are, that the idea that I had given fear such a huge place in my faith life for so many years is just tragic to me. It's just a tragic misunderstanding, you know. And if someone could have explained this to me when I was younger, my whole life would have been different. But I found it now. And it shows up carrying things like the cross, which is crazy. And I don't know quite what to do with it. And it doesn't make me feel like I fit in into Mormonism any better than I did before, except I am more at home in my own church than I ever have been before. Really? So that's been revelatory also. And that's teaching me things.
And is that just about bringing your full self? Because I think for lots of years, I felt very isolated because I withheld so much. And so part of what's been very healing for me is being more open and honest and vulnerable in those spaces. It's so ironic because it was the thing I was so afraid would make me feel like an outsider, but it was just like such a relief to just be known. I know, right? Like, and I have to learn this lesson over and over again. But
how can you be at home in a place that you're not known? Yeah, like it shouldn't surprise me that I never sat comfortably in those pews. Yeah, but I wasn't at home, and now I am, because I am known.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Would you do the reading for us? Would you read your poem, Babel?
You bet. Did you ever meet a poet who said, "No, I will not read my words"? Thank you for asking. This comes in the book in a chapter kind of about what I was just talking about, sort of finding my way back to God and to understanding, a new understanding, I guess, of the nature of God. Babel. God speaks to us in any language we can understand. God in birds, in trees, in wind, tall grass, its whisper and its bend. God in pie, if it's the kind my grandma made. God in the dishwater slipping through her hands after we were filled. God in the suds and in the song she hummed. Listen.
This resonates on such a deep soul level that God is speaking to us in every language all the time. And, but at the same time, I really do know the feeling of just wanting connection so desperately, and it just feels quiet. Like you start wondering again, maybe this is really all there is. And so I like can hold these two things. Like I believe in this abundant God that's always finding a way in. And I know the feeling of just being alone and, hearing the air conditioning click on and like, there's just nothing, like you're praying and it feels like there's nothing. So I wondered how, and so when I read that poem, I like what I wanted to ask from you is like, how do you connect? Like when you feel like you're really asking yourself the honest question with like a health crisis at your door, is there an afterlife? Like how are you connecting now?
I'm always surprised by that connection, I guess, when it happens. It's not something that I can orchestrate or call up on demand, but I just have to be willing. I have to always be seeking relationship. So that was a shift for me. I used to think that seeking God was praying with using the language that I had been taught to use, you know. And I do still find deep resonance in Mormon prayers. I think because they are so deeply ingrained in, you know, who I am. They're woven all through the fabric of my life, and I do still find meaning and resonance there. But prayer has also become all kinds of other things for me. And I had to completely reinvent prayer for myself in order to allow that to happen. And that was hard, and that was a long process. And starting with something as small as changing how prayer operates opened up the possibilities of all kinds of different ways to connect with God. And the really great thing about that, I was just thinking when I read that poem, and I'd never really thought about it this way, but the great thing about finding that I could connect with God or speak to God or you know, feel that kind of divine connection in all kinds of ways, make space for other people to do the same. And this is part of why I feel more at home in my own church now, right? If I can find God in my grandmother's pie, then like it's fine for Joseph Smith to have found God in the way that he did too, right? I may not totally understand always what he saw. I may not necessarily always resonate with the God that he describes, or that brother, you know, whoever describes on a testimony meeting in my own ward. I may think, man, are we even in the same church? What are you talking about right now? That happens still, you know, surprisingly often, but there is space for everyone to approach it in their own way. And that has been the huge gift of finding permission for myself to approach it and to hear God in my own ways.
That's beautiful. Cynthia, do you have some you would add? How do you connect?
The only thing I would add to that is I've stolen a line from Rachel Held Evans, and she says, on the days when I believe. So I just need to be honest that there are some days, like you say, you hear the air conditioner and you're like, is there anything else? You know, but on the days when I do believe, and those are more days than not, I, like Susan, I find God in my quaking aspens in my yard. Like I look up at them fluttering and I just think, what an amazing world we live in. Everything is a testament, I think, to God and the creation, which is ongoing for all of us. And this year I've decided, with everything going on in the world, it feels so heavy. And so I've had to take breaks from social media and things like that. Just so much noise. And the word I came up with was presence. And so that's kind of been my mantra. It's a little sticky note on my computer. And so I find God in just being present now. If I'm with Susan and we're sharing peach cobbler, I'm sitting there in that moment. I'm not looking at my phone. I'm not thinking, like, I'm just trying so hard to be present. And that's where I have found the divine, whether it's, you know, grandma's pie, cobbler with a dear friend, sitting under quaking aspen, you know. And for me, that has really been able to help me see the divine in all ways and in every ways. And it's so, in our Latter-day Saint scripture, pray unto God into your closets, pray into your fields, pray into him over your crops. And I just think, if that isn't this everyday contemplative prayer, then I don't know what is. And so that, for me, that's where my belief in God has kind of shifted to, is more of the everyday, because then it can be all day.
That's beautiful. Thank you.
I think we probably wouldn't be doing justice to this interview if we didn't recognize that, the book is called, and the podcast is called At Last She Said It. It's not At Last Somebody Said It. You know, it's specifically, it is specific to your voices and your work, that you're speaking as women. Not that you're speaking for all women, obviously, but your experience in the church as women specifically seems to me to be a driving factor behind a lot of what you're doing. Could you just quickly solve all the problems of women's church for us?
Absolutely. Happy to explain that. Cynthia, would you take it?
Oh, goodness. Yeah, we decided to call the podcast At Last She Said It, because we really do feel like there are I mean, I think a lot of what we've been talking about so far, like faith issues, like I see you nodding, Tim, but there are some things that maybe are so specific to women that we have dedicated an entire podcast. We've never interviewed any men yet. Maybe that will change. But so far, we have only interviewed women because it was really important to us to take a very specific lens when looking at faith issues.
Yeah.
So that's our mantra so far.
Yeah, totally. Susan, what would you add? And I think there's a lot we could get into here. I mean, obviously the church is, and I would say for a long time has been a proudly patriarchal organization. We use that word proudly, as you point out in your book, and that's presented especially for younger generations growing up. And we've talked with several people about this on the podcast, but the church is the only place in lives of women and young women in particular where they see any type of inequality among men and women. So just curious, I don't have a great question here, but what does that prompt for you?
It's funny that it's hard in our church for you to even articulate the question sometimes, right? And
that says it all.
When I go back and listen to early episodes in our podcast, it's funny to me, and Cynthia and I laugh about this, how hard it was for us to say the word patriarchy in the first, maybe half season of our podcast. We really had to ease into that. We weren't that comfortable saying it. We knew our listeners were not going to be comfortable hearing it. It's one of those kinds of radioactive words. It comes it arrives with so much baggage that, you almost can't even engage with it. It's overwhelming. And so we've tried really hard just to use our podcast as a vehicle to sort of unpack that term, to make it a little bit less radioactive if we can, to help church members understand that when we're talking about patriarchy, we're talking about a system. Like, it has a very specific definition. It's not, it's not a slur, or it's not saying anything against the church to call us a patriarchy. We fit the definition of a patriarchy. And as you mentioned, we're proud of that, right? There we have high callings in our church that wear that label. We are a patriarchy. And so that comes with specific issues, right? We're set up in a certain kind of organization, and that dictates things about our church, about our culture, about women's roles within it. And as you say, there's this increasing sort of disconnect for our daughters, between their experience in the world and their experience in the church. We're trying to have conversations that can give women a way to unpack some of that as they approach raising their own children, because we hear, you would be astonished how many women say to us, my 4-year-old is asking, when will I get to pass the sacrament? Or my 4-year-old son is asking, why don't girls pass the sacrament? These are things that weren't occurring to me in the 1970s growing up. Just never occurred to me, right? But our children are living in a different world than we do. And so we always just want to be mindful in our conversations that we try to be tough on systems, try to be very soft on people. I have a whole essay in the book called Dancing with the Patriarchy, where I sort of try to untangle the complexity of loving the patriarchs and really hating some things about the system in the ways that it wounds everyone, not just women, but men also, right? We're all at the mercy of this system that is, has functioned well in the world in some ways, much less well in other ways.
Yeah. Are you comfortable talking about some of those specifics? Because I think that this point exactly is so important, that the structure itself has proven to be problematic for women. But that doesn't mean that everyone in the structure is anything about them. Like there are plenty of men, most men, and almost all of the leaders that I have interacted are genuinely good-hearted leaders doing their absolute best. And I have nothing negative to say. I feel grateful for the position that they were in, the way that they held that stewardship. And I think that can sort of muddy the waters a little bit, that you start defending good behavior. So you can't talk about patriarchal structure because it feels like it's all tangled up, and you want to defend the good behavior. So why is a patriarchal system itself a problem for women outside of, not even in the church, just like, what do we know about patriarchal structures in the world and how that impacts women specifically, or men who aren't in positions of authority?
I think anytime you participate in a system where you don't see yourself represented, that can be really difficult. And that is the case for me. And obviously I don't speak for all women, but to show up and only see a man extend the callings, young boys bless the sacrament, pass the sacrament, men call who all the speakers are going to be. I mean, I was just in my parents' ward in Southern California a week ago, and it was High Council Sunday, and he brings his son with him. And I think, okay, when it's High Council Sunday, if they bring another man, then it's an all-male Sunday. And so it's very possible for me, for any of us, to show up at church and have an all-male lineup that day. And so if it were reversed, Tim, if you showed up and it was only ever women in charge, extending the callings, doing the sacrament, blessing the babies, all of that, would that hurt your soul? And I think we're just trying to give space for women for whom it hurts their soul to not see themselves represented. And again, plenty of women will totally disagree with me, and that's fine. Differentiation is a good thing. But for those of us who do have a lot of hurt over not seeing ourselves represented, those are real hurts. And that's why we choose to talk about that on the podcast.
Yeah. I remember that. Oh, sorry.
Oh, just sorry. This feels like one of those we don't believe our own stuff moments. We're explicit about partnership and how much we believe in equality. And so it feels like that puts into relief a Sunday where you're only hearing from men or only seeing men in charge, because it feels like there's something missing. Something feels like not this divine model that we're all trying to lean into. So I think that's a special type of pain. It's genuinely our doctrine.
Yeah.
So
I like to, go ahead.
No, please.
I like to use the example that I am a person who is thermally challenged. So is Susan. It's one reason we're friends. We're always cold.
We're always freezing.
Cold. We're always cold. And so I live really close to the Provo Trail. I walk the Provo Trail all the time, 12 months out of the year. And I remember one specific time walking the trail. I had on 2 pairs of pants that day because it was January, my down coat, and I passed like these cute little BYU students, and he had his coat off tied around his waist. So he got so hot. Anyway, I'm just like, what would that be like? And so I kind of, that's my metaphor for trying to help people understand, is that just because we feel the weather differently, it doesn't mean I'm not cold. You can stand there and say, I have my coat wrapped around my waist. What are you talking about? But I really, truly am feeling cold. And so I think we need to give space for people to be thermally challenged or whatever, however we feel the world, see the world, experience church, it's valid to them.
Totally. Yeah. And it is the air we're breathing. Like it all seems so normal, just because to me, and I think to a lot of people, just because it's all we've ever seen, and I'm sure you guys are familiar with Amy Olivest's,
sure.
She's the queen of flipping the script.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. Dear Mormon Man.
The first time I read that, it illustrates how much you're accepting something that is actually really unusual. You can't just, and maybe you shouldn't just unquestioningly accept it, because once you flip the script, it really changes how you see it.
Yeah. I think something that I noticed throughout the book that I really appreciated, because I think this is something that can be hard for me. It feels like you two are both like you're invested with your talent and your souls. And I think it can be easy when you feel dismissed or corrected or just in a place where you don't necessarily have the decision-making power. I think it can be easy to just disinvest or to put your gifts somewhere else where you feel like you have more autonomy. And maybe you're doing that in other ways also, but I appreciated all of the examples of meetings that you've been a part of where you're really trying. Like you're trying, like you're like having the real conversation. You're not rolling your eyes or shrugging your shoulders. It just feels like there's a soul investment in the church. And so I want to understand, what is the church actually to you? How is it functioning in your life? Like, is this about community for you? Is this about, this is your mother tongue and so it's where you grow? How do you think about what the church does in your life and what you do in the church?
I mean, it's sort of all of the above in a way, Susan. I wouldn't really know how to be anything else but this, I'm deeply Mormon. It's pioneer ancestors on every side. I have never known another language. It's definitely the way that I was raised. That was the approach that I was given to God, and I've had to figure out a way to take something as narrow as a religion, because I think religion is by definition narrower than God, right? I mean, there are so many different religions and so many different approaches. Hopefully we're all trying to get to the same thing, right? This is the path that I was put on at birth. I think that I can't imagine that there would be another path that would be more useful. There might be other paths that would be equally useful to me, but I don't really... I don't know. I don't really feel any need to go looking for one. I hope that people who read our book can feel that we have deep affection for the church, that it has been truly meaningful in our lives. We've built our lives here, you know, and so I'm happy to stand now. You know, I'm in my 60s now. I'm really happy to be standing still in the place where I built my life. Like that has meaning to me, and of course I'm going to defend my place here, right? Because I'm the one who's built my life in this place. But has the role of the church changed in my life? I would say that it has. I read much more widely than I used to. I see the church as, you know, a really meaningful vehicle to get me where it has in terms of my faith life. In some things, it has been in spite of the church. The church has sort of acted as an antagonist in a way, you know, and that has been useful and has furthered my growth also. So it's operated kind of on every level, and I have deep affection for my Mormon brothers and sisters. I think that I always will. But as it stands now, yes, Cynthia and I show up and sit in the pews on Sunday. We give talks. We fulfill callings. We all the things. Nothing has really changed that way. It still looks the same on the outside. The inside landscape is completely different.
Yes. Cynthia, how would you answer that?
I love the author Reza Aslan. I read all of his books. And one of the things I hear him say over and over in interviews is he says, you don't dig 6 1-foot wells, you dig 1 6-foot well to get to water. And so for me, and for him being a Muslim, but for me being a Latter-day Saint, is Mormonism is the well I have chosen to dig deep. And I'm happiest there, just digging away. And like you said, it's my mother tongue. It's my language. I have pioneers on one side, but on the other side, on my mom's side from Mexico, I see how the church in many ways came in and saved my mother's life.
Wow.
And so I grew up hearing the stories of my mother and her conversion, and the missionaries that baptized her were everyday names in our home. And so I love so much about the church and the organization and community, and people are good and holy. And like Susan, so much looks differently for me now. But I think that's a really normal part of, I know you guys have talked about stages of faith. And so I feel like I'm in maybe some of those stages now where I'm able to decide how I get that water best in my well. And it's worked well.
Can I ask you before we close? I know that we really need to wrap up, but can you just give us tips that come to mind for actually doing the boots on the ground work? Like, what do you do when you're going to teach a Relief Society lesson and you've been assigned a talk that you're just like, not sure that super resonates, or maybe you're just giving a talk in sacrament meeting and you're trying to pin down what can you say? I think there have been eras where it's been way easier for me to make a list of the things I can't say, and it can be really hard to just put together some thoughts that I really can get behind. You know, so we worship through action. Like, so how do you do that when the journey is very fluid?
I know for me, every time I have been asked to give a talk in the last 10 years, I always find a way to center it around a specific story about Jesus, whether it's a parable, a story from his own life. My last talk I gave, it was on the Syrophoenician woman, who's begging, can you heal my daughter who has mental illness? And so for me, it will always have to come back to stories about Jesus. And I have been pleasantly surprised as I have gotten older, just how much more I find myself being like, oh, this is what Jesus meant.
Wow.
It meant something, when I was younger, it was about be good like Jesus. And now it's just powered my discipleship in such a different way that really that's all I'm interested in talking about. But I feel like that's good because that's whose name is on our building is Jesus Christ. And so if it needs to be completely centered in him, that's where I'm always going to go, because that's, if we're going back to talking about knowing versus faith, that is one thing I know. Following Jesus has always turned out to be a good thing in my life. So that's my anchor.
Beautiful. Thank you.
For me, having spent so much of my life being uncomfortable or feeling like I was hanging by my fingernails really in the church, trying to make hard things work, difficult ideas work, I'm very attuned to the idea that some of these ideas are actually hard for people. I know the ways that they're hard for me, and I'm pretty good at figuring out a way into that topic for myself where I can make it okay, or at least come to peace of some kind with it, come to a place where I can sit with it, where I can allow that idea to be, here with me. And so when I approach a lesson or a talk, very often, if I look at it and I can not think of anything that I could possibly say about it, then that's what I lead with. I can't think of anything I could possibly say about this. Or here's why this topic is really hard for me. Here's what I struggled with about this talk. And let me tell you why that is, because there are other people in the room who might also be struggling with it. Yeah. And if I can't even go there, then sometimes I ask people to engage in the thinking exercise with me. Why might this topic be hard for someone who's here with us? And what can we talk about that might make that better? So I was well prepared by the rest of my life for that approach now, and I rely on it. And the beauty of it is really it makes space for me, it makes space for other people, and it invites everyone into the conversation, because there are, do not get me wrong, there are people who will raise their hand immediately to testify and redirect, right? You see the people shifting in their chairs because they're uncomfortable. Sister Hinckley has stepped up again and said, let me tell you why this is hard for me. But the beauty of it is, as more and more people show up real to that conversation and bring their whole selves to it, then even those people who have testified in a way to sort of shut the conversation down in the beginning have always eventually come around as their whole selves into the conversation also. I just feel like it's something, we don't feel invitation of those kinds at church very often. And so if I can be the one who will step up and be vulnerable and extend the invitation, I am always met, always. By others.
I do have to jump in though and toot Susan's horn, or however that works. But you have no idea how many people have written us over the last 6 years, because Susan talked about how she approaches her Relief Society lessons, asking for whom might this lesson be difficult. You have no idea how many people have written us and said, that's how I approach difficult lessons now when I'm teaching Relief Society or Sunday school or whatever now. And if you think about it, that's Jesus asking us to look at the margins, right? He was always going after those who were suffering the most. And so to take a lesson and center it on people who might be suffering, I mean, isn't that what we're all supposed to be doing anyway? So I love that is one of your legacies, Susan, is that so many women have taken that to heart, and they kind of keep that in their back pocket when they prepare lessons now.
Yeah. And in so many ways, I feel like that's what the podcast has been. I mean, I've been in Relief Societies where that has happened, and you can feel hearts opening together. Like it's such a connecting experience to have those conversations as a sisterhood in a classroom. But I think you've also really created that with the podcast and with the book. Thank you so much for having the conversations and for choosing to be so open and honest about it, because it really has made space for so many of us to join the conversation. Just really grateful. I'm grateful that you come and be on the podcast with us.
Thank you
pleasure.
so much.
Thank you both.
Thank you.
All right, thanks so much for listening. We really hope that you enjoyed this conversation with Susan Meredith Hinckley and Cynthia Winward. You can find their book at Last She Said It wherever books are sold, and you can find out more about them at lastshesaidit.org. And if Faith Matters is resonating with you and you get the chance, we'd love for you to leave us a review wherever you listen. We read all of the reviews and we really appreciate the support. Thanks again for listening.